Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Trump is sending out his campaign lawyers and the coronavirus task force as the country grapples with a delayed transition and skyrocketing infections. While active on Twitter, President Trump has taken no questions and had little on his public schedule since the election. However, his legal team has been making announcements. That includes the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who earlier today held a news conference to repeat unfounded claims of voter fraud. Many of Giuliani's allegations have been previously shot down in court over lack of evidence. Last night, the Trump legal team asked a judge to name the president the winner in Pennsylvania. Lawyers argued the state's Republican-controlled legislature should select the Electoral College electors. As a reminder, CBS News projected President-elect Joe Biden narrowly won the state. From one battleground to another, CBS News has also confirmed that the House Speaker and Senate Majority Leader of Michigan's Republican-controlled legislature are traveling to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Trump Friday. The Trump campaign has dropped its last remaining federal lawsuit in Michigan. It sought to stop the certification of ballots in the state's most populous county. Two Republicans on the canvassing board there are now trying to rescind their certification votes after it was reported one spoke with President Trump last night. But Michigan's Secretary of State says there is no legal process to do so. The continued focus on overturning President-elect Biden's win comes as the U.S. confirms more than 250,000 deaths from COVID-19. In the past 24 hours alone, more than 170,000 more Americans learned they've been infected. This was the line for a coronavirus test at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles Thursday. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is strongly urging Americans to suspend holiday travel and that any guests, including returning college students, keep their distance. Americans are still feeling the economic impact. New unemployment claims rose by 31,000 last week. The day after Christmas, unemployment benefits for an estimated 12 million people are set to expire. Food banks are seeing record demand. Here is a look at the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank, where distribution is up 145% because of the pandemic. Major Garrett, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Gabby Orr join me now. Major is CBS News Chief Washington correspondent. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. And Gabby is a White House reporter for Politico. Welcome. It is good to see you all. Major, let me begin with you. The White House Coronavirus Task Force briefing is back for the first time in 4 months. The Senate has left Washington for the holidays, but Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says Republicans are sitting down for stimulus talks. What do you make of this timing, Major? Do you think we could see a COVID relief package here soon?
In conversations with lawmakers on Republican and Democratic sides, there is some dim, and I emphasize the word dim, optimism that something could break loose in December, if for no other reason that the numbers in terms of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths are only going to get worse. That's not speculative, that is certain. And the economic damage inflicted by all of that and the very real prospect of intensified shutdowns in many jurisdictions in our country will deepen economic damage. All of that is real. All of that is going to be weighing heavily on the minds of all lawmakers. And if you just want to get grotesquely political about this, there are 2 Senate runoffs in Georgia. And if there is a perception there that the Republican leadership in the Senate in particular is indifferent to all of this, there could be political consequences. So December might be a time where this breaks loose. The size and scope of it is still up for negotiation. And it's that point that is sticking all of these things. There are things Republicans want that Democrats call absolutely intolerable, poison pills. Same thing on the Democratic side from the Republican perspective. What might assist this process is some dimension of presidential engagement and leadership. There has been none. And one revived coronavirus task force briefing from the White House briefing room doesn't get us anywhere close to that.
Well, Caitlin, the Trump administration is still blocking the Biden transition from officially starting. The president-elect explained the implications when it comes to the coronavirus response this afternoon. Let's go ahead and listen to that.
There is no excuse not to share the data and let us begin to plan. Because on day one, it's going to take us time. If we don't have access to all this data, it's going to put us behind the 8 ball by a matter of a month or more. And that's lives. How many would be lost as a consequence of that? I can't tell you.
So, Caitlin, how is the Biden team trying to prepare in the meantime?
Well, they are trying to move forward as best they can, and they're trying to do it in a public way. So you've seen nearly every day this week, the Biden transition team has had some kind of a public event. Today was one example to show that they are trying to move ahead with this work focused on COVID-19 and the challenges ahead. So today they held a virtual meeting with 10 governors. 5 of them were Republicans. This was an effort to show kind of what these conversations would be like once they are in office. The Biden team, the former vice president said today that he learned a lot from this meeting. The biggest thing that he learned from these governors was this concern about how long it took to get enough testing in their respective states and what that could mean for distribution of a vaccine. So the President-elect was trying to make the point today that this is not just something on this lack of ascertainment from the GSA is having very potentially could have some damaging effects in terms of getting a distribution of a vaccine. So kind of trying to make this front and center. So those are the kinds of events that they've had so far. Biden said today that a very dark winter is ahead, so that is acknowledging the stakes ahead, of course, for his team as they come into office in January, and so they're trying to waste no time in getting that underway. He also didn't rule out any legal action in trying to compel the GSA to ascertain the results of this election. He said he doesn't want to go that route yet, that he is trying to make these relationships and try to make things work at this point, but did not rule out any legal action. And we also have learned that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi will be heading to Wilmington tomorrow to meet with the president-elect and the vice president-elect.
All right. Well, Gabby, what moves is the Trump administration pursuing or considering inside the government before the Biden administration takes power?
Well, we know based on movement in the Senate this week that McConnell has been in contact with the Trump administration, and one of their major plans right now is to move forward on a number of judicial nominees, to move forward on several nominees to the Federal Election Commission, to basically install as many leftover nominees at this point that they can between now and January 20th, when President-elect Joe Biden will be inaugurated. In addition to that, we know that Chief of Staff Mark Meadows last week on a phone call asked members of the administration across different departments, both in the White House and at the agency level, to come up with at least 3 different tasks or goals that they can accomplish between now and the end of the year. A few of those items will deal with China. President Trump has obviously tried to maintain a very aggressive position and posture towards China, and he's expected to have some movements on that front in the coming weeks. We know that they are still trying to work out some immigration executive orders and actions that the president can take in his final weeks in office. And we know that the president is still trying to lower prescription drug prices. He issued an executive order earlier this summer that tried to address that problem, but didn't really have much traction or an impact. And so there are still discussions happening inside the White House, inside the Office of Legislative Affairs, and between Mark Meadows and senior administration officials about what exactly they can accomplish, both with the lame duck Congress, but also through the president's unilateral executive authority.
Well, Major, let's look at the Trump administration's efforts to overturn this election. When you look at the steps taken by Rudy Giuliani and others, how does that square with what we are seeing from the president's Twitter feed? And what is your sense of any kind of end game strategy here?
We really should decouple ourselves from the notion that there's any strategy here. There is no strategy. And there is no credible effort to overturn the election. This election is not going to be overturned. There is an effort to complain about this election. There isn't even a legitimate, by any historical or legal standard in this country, a contested election going on. There is a complained about result. That's all. The legal efforts so far have not brought into legal question or invalidated by legal terminology a single vote cast in the 2020 election. Not one. There are flagrantly fictitious assertions and allegations about fraud. But guess what? In a court of law in this country, you have to prove a point of law was violated and produce evidence that that point of law was violated. And in election law, that means it is so egregious and so visible that a well-intentioned vote must be invalidated. That hasn't happened in one jurisdiction at all. And so this isn't about overturning. This is about complaining and delaying governance of the incoming administration. And everything that Gabby just said, what does that tell you? That tells you everyone within the West Wing knows what has happened. The election's been lost. Do what you can before you have to leave office. Every president is entitled to do that. So the West Wing beneath this complaining president is trying to do what it can do legally and procedurally to put the last thumbprint of the Trump administration on American government. That is perfectly within this administration's right and historical precedent. There's nothing unusual about that. What is highly unusual and threatening to our very understanding of a peaceful transition of power is delaying ascertainment and delaying the transition. There is no credible legal reason to do that. There is only a political grievance nursed day and night by one person and one person only, the President of the United States.
All right, so Gabby, if that's the view from the West Wing, what about Republicans? How is the lack of a concession impacting Republicans' ability to prepare for the Biden administration?
Well, Republicans both on Capitol Hill and across Washington right now are totally handicapped by the fact that they cannot acknowledge Joe Biden is going to be the president in a matter of weeks. There's an unspoken rule that President Donald Trump has essentially initiated, which is that you cannot legitimize the fact that Joe Biden will soon take over the White House. And anybody who does will face repercussions by both the president on his favorite forum, Twitter, or repercussions from his loyal base and supporters. That has really caused problems among conservatives and Republicans who are now frightened at the fact that they could be caught flat-footed when Biden takes office. We know that President-elect Biden has talked about undoing President Trump's legacy on items like immigration, foreign policy, China, withdrawing from the World Health Organization on day one of his presidency, that he would sign a series of executive orders to dismantle those elements of the president's legacy. And yet right now, because Republicans are not able to actually identify those issues or talk openly about those for retribution, they can't plan accordingly. They can't come up with a legal strategy. They can't start hiring administration officials who would be valuable resources and assets in those imminent legal battles. So it really has created a moment in Republican politics and across Republican think tanks and the conservative movement, especially, where a lot of these coalition groups that would normally be a counterweight to an incoming Democratic administration are completely unable to actually prepare for that scenario.
Well, Caitlin, what do we know about a potential Biden cabinet?
Well, Biden actually made some news this afternoon in that press conference where he said that he has already decided who his Treasury Secretary will be, and he said to expect an announcement after Thanksgiving. So some news there, and of course, a critical role as we're looking at the economic fallout and continued economic fallout from a pandemic that appears to be worsening. Our colleagues, Bo Erickson, Ed O'Keefe, Nancy Cordes, and Paula Reed have done extensive reporting on some of the potential names, other names that could be in this administration. Tony Blinken has been mentioned as a possible Secretary of State, of course, a longtime advisor to the former vice president, now president-elect, through the vice president's office when he was there, and also when he was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee back in the Senate. So a name to keep an eye on, of course. Also, Pete Buttigieg has been mentioned as a possible VA secretary, or also potentially a UN ambassador, some kind of foreign policy role, is what our colleagues have been reporting. Bernie Sanders has also been out there doing interviews, talking about his interest in being the Secretary of Labor. That's something to keep an eye on as well. The transition team is going through this process. It will be very different from the kind of public reality show-esque way in which the Trump team picked people, especially Secretary of State. But this news today that Biden has already chosen a Treasury Secretary, and that we should expect some news on that after Thanksgiving.
All right, Major Garrett, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Gabby Orr. These are serious times, but it is always wonderful to see all of you. Thank you very much. 62 days until inauguration, everyone. Sure.